Hello and good afternoon. And my name is Martin Coward, and welcome to Noonday Meditation and Contemplative Prayer Power Hour. And I'm so glad to be back this Monday. I was off last week taking a really fun and exciting and powerful course. I'm so glad I did it. It's really helped change some of the direction of where I want to go and what I want to do in the world. And part of it's going to be reflected here. One thing that I have done is I have created a new Facebook group to work with my tribe, which is gay, bisexual, and transgender men. So if you are tuned in from that new Facebook page, welcome to Noonday Meditation and Contemplative Prayer Power Hour. And just so you know, we've been gathering here in this virtual sanctuary, if you will, almost a year now, since the beginning of the pandemic, to love and support each other through this year of crisis and turmoil. And while we're getting through it, and we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, we're not completely out yet, so I'm not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, I just said I've expanded my universe to include my GBTQ brothers into the space through our own special Facebook group specifically for us to work with our own shadow issues. And I'm still going to be here in the same space every day at noon for my beloved fans, because I love and need you here. So if you're here with us today, like I always do, I'm going to ask you, if you would, just to type into the chat and say you're here. Let me know your name, say hello. And I really encourage people to get interactive. I mean, it's a lot more exciting and a lot more fun for us if I've got you asking me questions about what we show and what we look at. And the way, as if you're new to this, the way we look at, the way we do it every day is I come up with some type of spiritual truth, if you will, some wisdom teaching. Because most of us are in the West, particularly Christians, are not familiar with the wisdom teachings of Jesus. There's my dear friend, Audrey Schmaltz. Audrey, it's so good to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you're going to be on here with me one day coming up. I think it's on Friday. I'm excited about that. You're going to come join me and share your truth and wisdom with us. And so I'm looking forward to that. So what we do, just if you're new, because like I say, I have a brand new Facebook group for gay and transgender and bisexual men specifically. And if you're new, and one thing is going to be new, I'm going to try to include how some of this might land on us, because we do have our own sort of shadow issues, if you will. And what we do here in this space is we look at the wisdom teachings of Scripture, specifically the wisdom teachings of Jesus. Many of us are not even familiar with the wisdom, but that's where we get our power and our strength. And I heard something over the weekend from something I listened to on the wisdom teachings of Cynthia Bourgeault. And it made me think, wow, I'm going to share that. It was so transformational for me that I'm going to actually use that as the basis of our meditation. But we'll get to that in just a second. But hold on, because I think this is really going to be a very exciting opportunity for us to listen to someone, the Reverend Cynthia Bourgeault, who is a Episcopalian priest and a modern mystic who has a tremendous amount of wealth of knowledge and information about wisdom teachings. And she's going to share with us, we're going to listen a little bit about her perception of the Beatitudes. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of stuff, but what I want to do is just sort of touch on the point of what my title is about. How we think about God may be costing us a lot, and it might be costing us a lot of money. Because when we think of God as something outside of ourselves, and we think that we're having to live up to an expectation to prove our worthiness to this God outside ourselves, then we spend a whole lot of time and energy trying to prove we're worthy when we're already worthy. And so it's this whole notion of worthiness. And I can tell you this, gay people have a whole new sense of worthiness from living a life of being shamed and bullied for our sexual orientation. And basically, it's an attack on the essence of who we are. And so this sort of old Western way of looking at God and viewing God has had a very detrimental or very damaging impact on everybody in the world. And it could be especially damaging to gay people, because we were all taught at an early age that all of us were taught that it was bad. And those feelings of bad, those feelings of sexual energy were bad and wrong, and therefore we were flawed and not worthy, and we were not good enough. But it goes back even deeper than that. It goes back to this whole Western concept called born into original sin, which is absolutely absurd. It is absolutely absurd to think that we are born sinners. Sin means to turn away from God. We are born from God. And if you look at the wisdom teachings, we realize that we are the divine. There is no sin. We are born 360 degrees of radiant love energy. And that's the Eastern philosophy. And in the Eastern philosophy, and which I think is a much truer to the wisdom teachings, is that we're born into this 360 degrees of radiant love, unconditional love energy. That's the essence of who we are. And we all still have that at the center of us. But life circumstances create us through fear and pain, create us to get off the path, if you will, to get off the divine path and onto what I call the egoic path. Now, this is not a bad thing. We all do this, and as gay people, we do it sometimes out of necessity to survive. And in some country, you could be killed for being gay. So there's a reason why we need to create an artificial or a false self or a false way of living in the world in order to be physically safe. This is a real reality. I mean, I can tell you when I was in college, I had 2 friends who were murdered going home from college by bullies. So there's a real reason that we have created this mask, if you will, this false self in order to fit in with the rest of the world. So that's one part of it. But the more difficult and the more complicated and the more damaging part is what is done to us internally. It's this sense that we are not worthy. There's something wrong with us. It plays on that inner demon that the ego loves, that you're somehow lacking in something. We call that the scarcity mindset. And so there is not enough, I'm not enough, and I'm unworthy. And then everybody does that, by the way. The number one limiting belief, the number one thing that keeps most people up at night, gay or straight, whatever, is focused around money and self-worth. Everybody has that issue. But you layer on top of that the self-worth issues that the LGBTQ community has, or anybody else that's been marginalized, and you get a double sense of unworthiness and shame. And it's even more painful. Sound right? And then you get our religious institutions and authority figures telling you you're flawed and you're wrong. So you just think, and that's why suicide and death among gay people is so much higher than other people. Because you've got all these power structures and all these things telling you that you're basically flawed. So we begin to believe that. It's called internalized homophobia. So how do we get out of that? Again, we go and listen to the truth. And today we're going to, what was Jesus really telling us? Particularly in the Beatitudes. And I want to back up one more thing to teach. Jesus was not here to establish a religion. That was the furthest thing from his mind. He was a teacher of what we would say in today's world, non-dual consciousness. He was just like Buddha. He was an enlightened human being, who was living from a place of unconditional love, which is very, very rare. And he was sharing this wisdom of how to get to this same place, what he called the kingdom of heaven. Kingdom of heaven is not someplace you go when you're dead if you're a good little boy or girl. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is a higher level of consciousness within ourselves. It is moving into that divine space, and that's where our power is. So when we begin to think about the divine is ourselves, not my individual self, but the essence of our life self, that spark within us. In the gay world, that creative nature that we have that we used to be afraid of. When we step into we get the power of that, there's enormous amounts of resources to do anything. That's our creative power. So I'm going to turn on this right now, and we're going to listen to this recording from Cynthia. It's about 10 minutes. And this is the invitation. This is the invitation. We're going to make this part of the meditation. So go ahead right now and get yourself comfortable, sit up straight, and just begin to breathe. As you know, in our breathing, we do what's called conscious breathing, which means we just get more and more conscious of our breathings. This is how it's going to look today. It's going to look a little different than typically. I'm going to spend a few minutes getting us into heart space, just letting go of all our thoughts, so that we can listen to what these messages from an open heart and an open mind, and just see what comes up. Okay, sound good? Anybody got any questions? Put them into the Facebook. Okay, so this is it. We just slow down. So whenever you need to sit up tall, the proud human being that we are, and just begin to breathe and open the heart. Might want to take a really nice deep breath in and just let it go. And as you let it go of all the thoughts and all the beliefs and all the opinions in your head. Just let them all go. They're all stories. That's what Richard Rohr calls junk in our head. We're going to do what's known in contemplative as emptying out. No, so we're going to empty out so we've got room for the divine. So again, take another deep breath in. Deep into your belly, expand your heart, anchor it down, find that anchor in your belly, and just let it all go. And when you let go of every thought, every belief, anything you're thinking of me, anything you're thinking of you, just let all of it go. Any judgments, anything you think's good or bad, right or wrong, particularly any beliefs you have about God, let go of all of them. Give yourself an opportunity to take a brand new, fresh look at your experience with God. Not as a belief, but as an experience. So one more deep breath. Take it a nice deep breath. Now just settle into your breathing. Nice, the rise and the fall of the rib cage. And just know that you're loved. Know that you're here to be loved and cared for. Tap into that divine mother within you. And just fall into her arms. Fall into the arms and to the stillness of what we might call unconditional love. And as you do, begin to listen. And if you can't hear, for some reason, type it in the chat. But I think you should be able to hear pretty well. Let me see here. And let's go.
Encountering the Wisdom Jesus continues with Session 4, The Path of Metanoia with Cynthia Bourgeau.
Repent, for the end of the world is at hand. We use this term repent commonly in our Christianity to feel sorry for ourselves, to talk about how bad we are. to turn the direction that we're looking for our happiness. But as I said in our last session, what this word metanoia or repentance really means is to go beyond the mind or go beyond the larger mind, to get out of that little binary egoic operating system that is, by virtue of its own inner structure, always going to see the world in terms of them and us, inside and outside, to get out of that mind and to move into a larger mind, which might be called unitive, non-dual, single, which sees the world from the perspective of wholeness and accesses the world from the perspective of wholeness. This is the heart of the message of Jesus. This is what the teaching of Jesus is all about. Let's get into this larger mind. How do we do it? What is it all about? What does it look like? I realize that this interpretation of the teaching of Jesus is much less familiar to people than what you've grown up with in your Sunday school. So what I'd like to do in this teaching session is to just go through some of the most familiar teachings of Jesus and see how we can hear them from perhaps a different take, with perhaps a different sort of ring to them when we're approaching them from this standpoint, not as little moral lessons, but as radical calls to the transformation of your consciousness. So I'm going to move through some selected teachings of Jesus, beginning with some that are very familiar and moving into turf that is perhaps much less familiar. So let's start with one of the most familiar turfs of all, the Beatitudes. Almost every Christian can quote maybe a few of them. They're one of the things you get to memorize in Sunday school. And as we've talked about, this is perhaps the core, most dense-packed teaching of Jesus, which he taught people around the Sea of Galilee. It presents his teaching in a nutshell, in 9 little sayings. I'm not going to work with all 9 of them, but I am going to work with the first 7 and listen to them and then give you a wisdom interpretation of them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. From a wisdom interpretation, from the point of view of the transformation of consciousness, this means blessed are those who are in an inner attitude of receptivity, of openness, of the possibility of the Spirit, because only they can possibly receive anything. There's a wonderful Zen story that exactly translates this teaching about a young student who came to a master to see if he could be accepted as a pupil. And the student goes on talking and talking and talking and talking about all his spiritual experience, about his teachers in the past, about his skills, about his insights. The master sits there and begins to pour a cup of tea. And he pours and pours and pours. And when the cup that he's pouring into is filled, he just keeps on pouring. And eventually the student notices what's going on and looks in horror and says, "You should stop pouring. Your cup's overflowing. It can't hold anymore." And the teacher says, "Yes, and neither can you. You're so full, how can I possibly teach you?" This beatitude speaks to that principle. Remember that beautiful teaching from Thomas Merton I shared earlier. At the center of our being is a point or spark of pure nothingness. And our tradition has insisted that it is only through the gate of nothingness that we can begin to enter this higher mind, this non-egoic, non-binary operating system. As long as we're filled with ourself, we can go no further. So there is that teaching from a wisdom standpoint. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. The second beatitude. And essentially, from a wisdom perspective, this one is talking about vulnerability and flow. When we mourn, we are in a state of being in touch with that which is deep. We're in a state of being open in the heart, in a state of not holding on anymore because we've lost. It's another state of emptiness. And it's a state of being able to allow our heart to be at one with this position of open vulnerability. And in that way, something can reach us, something can comfort us. So we see in these first two teachings that Jesus is essentially saying that we need to be in a state of inner emptiness and inner flow before any of this transformation of consciousness can begin to happen. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, is how the third beatitude is usually interpreted. A better translation is, blessed are the gentle. And perhaps an even better one is, blessed are the gentled. Blessed are the ones who are domesticated, the ones who have tamed the wild animal energy within them, the wild sense of threat, of aggressiveness that grows up as part and parcel of our binary operating system. We'll hear it later described as, blessed are those who have tamed the lion within us. Because only when we have done that, only when we have dealt directly with the animal instincts of our binary operating system, are we able to inherit the earth. Can the kingdom of heaven really become the kingdom of earth? Can we live abundantly and well on this life? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Well, the key to this beatitude is to understand what the word righteousness means. In our modern kind of post-Reformation hearing of this, righteousness means the same thing as virtue, as doing good, as behaving. What righteousness meant in the early mystical Judaic world that Jesus went in was something much more vibrant than that. You could actually best translate that as a force field, as a vibrant, tingling reality of being in the presence of God, being aligned. In other words, of being in the vibration of God. To hunger for righteousness is to hunger for being within the being of God, to hunger for being center, to hunger for connectedness. And it's only in this hunger for that connectedness that anything can happen. But what Jesus says is that when you can feel this hunger in you, when you can feel this hunger for the primal vibration that connects you to the divine world, to the axis beyond your sort of linear human life, as soon as you hear, as soon as you yearn, it shall be filled. Because as we approach this path of transformation, the most valuable thing that we have working in favor of us is our yearning. There are many teachers who will tell us exactly that the yearning is the thing that is already connecting us to the divine. The eye with which you see God is the eye with which God is already seeing you, Meister Eckhart said, a great Christian mystic of the medieval time. So when we yearn, we're already bringing ourselves into sympathetic vibration with this deeper heart knowing. And remember, we talked earlier about how the heart is an organ of alignment. It connects us. Yearning is the vibration of that connectedness. So this is what he's talking about in this teaching from a wisdom perspective. It's not about those that want to do good deeds so they're rewarded later. It's about being in connection with your fundamental yearning. The next, blessed are the merciful, for they shall find mercy, for they shall obtain mercy. Once again, this comes back to the flow. As we step into this flow of compassion, of mercy, which is perhaps the most fundamental way with which the divine moves into the world, we become part of that flow. We enter it. And the nature of that second, that unitive, that non-dual thinking, is that it thinks through mercy. It thinks through compassion. Compassion is its way of thinking. So he's talking about moving into a flow which sustains that other heart mind. And then, perhaps the most important of all, blessed are those whose heart is pure, for they shall see God. Now, this purity of heart is another thing that we've tended to corrupt in our very sort of morality-oriented teachings of the West. For us, purity of heart would mean almost certainly being virtuous, perhaps being celibate, perhaps not lusting, perhaps all of these sort of things that have to do with a kind of carefully guarded purity. But in the wisdom teaching, purity means singleness, and the proper translation of this beatitude is really, blessed are those with a single heart, with a heart that is not divided, with a heart that is one. Remember that word we've been using, ihidaya, with a heart that wants one thing only. In other words, and this is actually the core of the praxis in a nutshell, when the heart becomes whole, you see God. When the heart becomes single, you absolutely see with the eyes of this other consciousness. So the question, of course, is how do we make the heart whole? How do we make the heart single? And that will be the subject of our next teaching session. But in this very beatitude, he flags that as the core of the praxis. Somehow, when the heart becomes single, the rest will follow. And it isn't just moral actions, it's a seeing of all that we now just sort of grope toward. And the last one that I'm going to talk about, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Well, of course, when our hearts are gentled, when our hearts are single, when we've tamed the animal instincts, we become peacemakers because we're no longer wielding that sword of our binary thinking, which divides the world into goodies and baddies, insiders and outsiders, the winning team and the losing team. What flows from the united being is a peaceableness that flows into the world is harmony and compassion. He talks in the next two Beatitudes about persecution, and I'm not going to speak about this too much.
So now I'm going to invite us just to go into about 10 minutes of silent meditation. Allow that bell to wake us up from our thinking and our planning and our plotting and our judging, and just let it all go, particularly anything we have that may be shifting about our beliefs in God. Just let it all go and listen and open your heart with curiosity. Find that deeper place within you. Okay, welcome back. The invitation is to type into the chat and let me know what you thought. And if you're watching the replay, which is probably more common than the live, which is fine, write, put your comments into the chat as well, and I'll reply because I want this to be as interactive as possible. So some of you may be wondering, why are we listening to a CD or a tape about the Beatitudes? It's just simple. She said it. These Beatitudes, these very simple statements, are the heart of what Jesus' message was all about. And that is not what most of us are taught in the West about Christian belief systems. And back to my point is this: how we think and relate to God may be standing in our way. because we're believing in a false sense of self. Because if we're believing in a false sense of self and in a false God, we're believing in a false sense of self. Yes, the Sermon on the Mount. Love the Sermon. She does an interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. I'm gonna put her back up on the screen for just a second, because I want you to know, I want to give credit to this book and say that if you got something from these Beatitudes, this one short book is just chock full of the wisdom teachings of Jesus. And Cynthia Bourgeault does a wonderful, wonderful job. So you can go to audible.com, which is where this came from, and you can download it, and it's not a whole lot of money. And I highly recommend it if you're trying to understand and get your arms around what we call the wisdom teachings. And it's those wisdom teachings, those principles, the universal law of abundance that I rely on to create transformation, to teach, to create a transformative experience of how we get out of the scarcity mindset into a sense of abundance. Because when we begin to live a life out of abundance, we live an abundant lifestyle. And I'm going to share one little piece with you that I'm just so excited about, and that is that I personally the course I took last week was a live online course on how to bring my business more fully into the world. It's really about being more conversational and being willing to be out and just talk about it like I'm doing right now. And what they took me through was what I take my clients through: a transformational experience from scarcity to abundance. And live interaction, not a course, a program of live interaction with people, sharing their stories, sharing their truth, helping me see exactly what I'm helping you see. That there's another way of looking and seeing the world, and that's through the lens of the divine within ourselves. And then how do we put that into action? Well, at the end of this, I had to. They asked us if we wanted to join their program, which is a very robust program. So if I want more of this wonderful transformational experience that I had last week for free, now I got to write a big check, a really big check for me, by the way. So big it's my entire Social Security check, which I had committed to give them tomorrow. And it feels fantastic. I am so excited about that. And I'll tell you why, because now it feels like it's exciting because it's an exchange of love. It's like an investment in Martin. And I got to say, when I let go of my fear and scarcity about how, I just, all of a sudden, everything changed. And I literally woke up this weekend and today for the first time in years without those vultures on the bedpost telling me I wasn't enough. I woke up this morning from a feeling of abundance and joy and jubilation that it's not like I'm talking about it. So I'm telling you this. I had that transformation. I've had it before, but never anything quite like this. And it's exciting. And in that week, that's why I've created I've gotten really clear about who Martin is and who I serve and the community I serve. And I have and this is not Martin Coward, this is something I've developed, the ability to create transformational space. Particularly in my one-on-one coaching and even in my group coaching, currently in my group coaching, when I've got people, when I can see you, when I can interact with you. In the tribe are gay men and bisexual men and transgender men. So I'm rebranding myself as the gay prosperity coach. And that's exciting. These are my people. And if you're listening to this for the first time, it's because I love you and I care about you. And I want you to have the same transformational experience that I've had. So you can bring your crafts, your creativity, if you're a DJ, so you can be a better musician. You can bring more music. You're not relying on the music, you're relying on that deeper source in you to bring the music out. I have the good fortune to work with a number of clients that are musicians. And it's great because I know when they're in that flow of the divine playing their instrument, that they know what this divine space is, this higher level of consciousness, because they're in that flow. They're creating music out of that. They become the instrument. The reason why I think it's so important that they create a very deep spiritual practice so that they can apply that to everything in their lives, and they can even become even more creative and more in flow with their creative talents and their skills. So that's what I'm here to teach you today, is that the path, we're all on this path, the divine path, and we get taken off the path. We weren't born taken off the path, by the way, like Christian philosophy says you're born into. That's what sin means. It means to be in disconnection with God. You cannot be disconnected with God because it's who you are, it's who we are. So the whole idea is ridiculous. So instead of thinking, I was born disconnected from the divine, I was born the divine. I was born 360 degrees, and so were you, of pure love. That's the Christ child. It wasn't just one guy named Jesus that was born 2,000 years ago. Every living baby is born into that 360 degrees of Christ radiance. We all have that. And that's where our power is. And if we're gay people, it's our queer nature. But we were taught all those feelings of sexual desire and yearning. Oh, don't have that because they're wrong. Bull, that's where my power is. That yearning she was talking about, that yearning for that deeper connection. Don't play with sexual energy. It is powerful. And it's love. And I don't know why some people are more attracted to the same sex and some are not. I have no idea, but that's their unique nature. That's their queer nature. And the more we can learn to love that part of ourselves, and that's how we do it, through this contemplative practice. We get intimate with our queer nature. So I just want to say, that's what we're talking about today. Is we're talking about how do we get intimate and to step into our power. That's where our power is. That's where our joy, that's where our excitement, our enthusiasm. So where we have a lot of wonderful relationships with loved ones by making love, embracing those deep feelings of yearning and connection and intimacy, first with ourselves and then with another human being that's attracted to that within us. This is the mystery of life. This is the mystery and the joy of life that I'm celebrating. We're celebrating. And that's what these Beatitudes are about. That's what the wisdom teachings of Jesus. The kingdom of heaven is about a place of love and joy and prosperity here and now in the moment. Because it's how we view and see ourselves in the world. And when we see the world through the mind of Christ, as we say, or the eye of God, everything changes. We love everything. Everything is beautiful. It's unconditional love. It's not a way of thinking, it's a way of being. It's a transformational process of being. So thank you very much. And I want to thank all of those who might have joined me through my new Facebook page, the Financial Mystics, the Financial Heart Space for gay, transgender, and bisexual men. And the reason why I did that is because our work is different than anybody else's, because we are wounded differently than anybody else, and our shadows are different than anybody else's. And I want a safe place for us to be vulnerable. And because I care about you. And I want you to have a life of love, joy, and prosperity. Stay tuned, because I'm about to run I'm putting together right now a new 5-day program specifically for GBTQ men called Mastering Our Queer Nature. It's going to be free too. It's a 5-day free program. And the way you get to it is to, if you're gay, bi, or trans man, join our new Facebook group. And you'll find out all the information. Plus, there are going to be all sorts of other free programs, free workshops. I really want us to liberate ourselves from any of this old notion of not good enough and unworthiness. It is too painful. I know I lived that way for too many years. And how I got out of it is just what we're doing right now. I let it go. I listened to the spiritual teachings of Jesus. I listened to the wisdom of the sacreds. It could be the wisdom of Buddha. It could be the wisdom. I just happen to find, because I grew up Christian, so much value and love when I begin to understand those teachings, particularly the teachings of the Beatitudes from the place of the wisdom of consciousness and transformation. So I hope today was valuable. This is a little new format for me. Like I say, I'm expanding it. I'm expanding in some ways, and I'm contracting a little bit in other ways to make it more. And I love the sermon. Listen to the Sermon on the Mount sometimes, Audrey, from the perspective of the wisdom teachings. So tomorrow, one more thing. Tomorrow, you're in for a treat. My dear friend, Tanya Sterl, I think I said her name right. She's a friend of mine from the National Speakers Association. I met her a few years ago, and she is a dynamo. And what she is, she's a stylist. She's a personal stylist, and she's got more style, and she's funny as she can be. She's just as funny as she can be. She never means, she's just really funny. And she got a big heart. And she's been following me this whole year, and she said it's really made a difference in my life. But what she's discovered is that she's got a real gift for helping women, particularly, look at style as a way of self-care, how they dress. And I'm going to let her talk more about that. But she's going to be here tomorrow as my guest. And I am so excited about her being here because she is a beautiful, loving, brilliant woman, tremendous amount of heart, and just more style than you can imagine. But it's style coming from a place of authenticity and generosity. And that's what she teaches others and teaches other women and brings into the world. So we got a lot going on this week. And Audrey, I think, is coming on toward the end of the week. I don't forget what day on the calendar. I believe it's Friday. So, yeah, I'm glad to be back. It's great to be back. And I'm glad to be now broadcasting live through the new Facebook group. And if you're hearing this on another group, another feed, and you're gay, or you're a man and you're gay, and you're bisexual, or you're transgender, or you're questioning, that's what GBTQ means, gay, bi, transgender, or questioning men, then come join us. Find out what it's all about. And because I'm just there for you. And everything there is just a gift. You're the gift. I'm the gift. And that's what we're coming for. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll be back tomorrow. In the meanwhile, may love and prosperity prevail.